Smiling always seems to annoy people more than actually insulting them. Or maybe I just have an annoying smile. Jim Butcher, Stormfront. You're listening to AMI Audiobook Review. I'm Jacob Shamansky. What's your biggest audiobook pet peeve? That one little, seemingly insignificant thing that for whatever reason drives you crazy. Everyone's particular about their audiobook preferences, and this episode is all about those little particularities. Plus, Sara Hillis joins us to talk about the place audiobooks can have within romantic relationships. Couples always watch movies together. Why not audiobooks? I can't wait to get into that because she's here with her husband, Michael Fehr. This is going to be awesome. Rams, Nisreen, welcome.
Hello. I think this is going to be a heated topic.
Heated?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That's
There's going to be some controversies.
Yeah, I've already gone through the many responses we got from our book club to this question. That question being, what's your biggest audiobook pet peeve? I don't know if it's like the negative aspect of this question, but we got so many answers from this and back and forths as well. Like people got heated.
It's a nice vent session, yeah.
It's a good vent session.
A lot of people like complaining too.
Yeah. Oh. Yeah. It's because you don't always get the opportunity, and when somebody prompts you, it's like, all right, now it's my time to shine. Let's read through some of these because we have quite a few. Okay, the first one is from Ryan Huey. This one gets me, and it doesn't happen very much any longer, thank goodness, but it used to be like this a lot. Back in the day, even just a few years ago, they would not announce what chapter you were on. For instance, the narration would not start like this. Chapter 3. And then into the story. It drove me crazy and it really affected my reviews. I'm not sure why it was the way it was, and I don't know who made that decision, but 2 thumbs way down. You know, one thing I've seen in the past is audiobook producers like do subdivisions of chapters where they don't just announce the chapter, but they'll actually like, if it's a long chapter, they'll go like chapter 1, and then read in chapter 1. 2. It's like chapter 1.3, 1.4, and whatever. I don't know why they do that. I wonder if that's like for the producers and they just like left it in there because they didn't like communicate or something. But that's my first instinct.
That's paper so edit weird. Notes that never got taken out.
No, honestly, I'm dead serious. I think that might be what it is. But I've seen that a couple times, so I'm not sure about that. But what Ryan is getting at is like, I totally get it because when you read a book in print, you get a perfect idea of how long you are. And when you're listening to an audiobook, you don't always do unless you're looking at that like percentage, but we don't do that. So when we get to like a chapter point, I want to know where I'm at because it also changes the mindset of how you read it. Where if you're in the middle, you kind of expect a lot of things to happen. Whereas if you're 3/4 of the way through, you sort of expect it to wind up towards a climax.
First of all, I was very snobby about the production of audiobooks that I was willing to take in from the very beginning, since I started listening to audiobooks. So maybe it's just that I haven't consumed enough of the older recordings of audiobooks, and the few that I have listened to, I haven't experienced this. But I'm assuming that people who have experienced it are highly annoyed.
The production standards have gone way up.
Yeah. Is it only the start of chapters, though, or do you get similar experiences from different parts within the sections also?
Sometimes there are certain books that will have like annotations and footnotes, and I have had narrators read those and sometimes not. I've seen books where the narrators will actually read like the glossary and like the table of contents if it's a nonfiction book sometimes. And that's a bit weird because you kind of use it as an index, you know, like as a resource, but it's super impractical if it's in audio form where like you already have an audiobook that's like digitalized and separated into chapters, and you see that reflected on like your app that you're using, and you can already jump to the different chapters. So I'm like, what a waste of time. Why did you include this? Why did you spend the time reading this?
Yeah, okay, well, I have a lot of those kinds of pet peeves anyways, but then we get into the conversation around like abridged, unabridged, potentially. maybe we don't have
I
time
mean,
to go
this is
into
a
that. Right?
conversation about pet peeves. So it really is about
Yeah.
like those small things, right? Like it's not the big things. It's about the petty
No.
little things that we get annoyed with.
It's the things that put us off with audiobook listening. And we did specify, like when you put out this question, Jacob, you specified audiobooks.
Yeah.
So we're going to get a lot of that. Jeffrey Rainey wrote in, we've had him on the show before. And he says, my biggest pet peeve when it comes to audiobook reading is when the author of the book has a better reading voice than the narrator that they choose to read the audiobook. The example that comes to mind for me is for the book A Light That Failed. The two co-authors have very distinct accents, one American, and she sounds like Clint Eastwood, and the other in a very pleasing European accent. And yes, they swapped both of them for a narrator who sounds like the voice actor who plays Prince Charming in Shrek 2. It was very disappointing, which is unfortunate because it's a really good book. Honestly, Jeff, the first thing I want to say about this is I cannot believe you can get past the pet peeve of bad narration or like this narration was not it for me to then say, but the book was good, so I wish they did better. I don't have the capacity, guys. Again, going back to snobby, I don't have the capacity to go through, forget a terrible narration, like a middle of the line narration. Like if I don't enjoy the performance out of the gate, then I find it very difficult to sit through.
You can't.
Yeah, to
Everything's
keep
got to be
going.
perfect.
Right.
Yeah. Pacing, narration, all that's got to be good. So anyways, Jeff went through a lot of commentary around the narration itself. What do you think about just his aspect of accents, swapping? Do you two do this, by the way? Do you, while listening to a book, think I would have loved this person instead to have narrated?
No, I never think of that stuff, honestly. I leave that to the producers. If they create an audiobook, I assume they've made a good choice for the narration. And if I'm reading a book and I find that the narration is bad, well, I'm not going to get mad at a audiobook for what it's not, right? You have to judge things for what they are. And if they made a bad casting decision for the narration, then so be it. That's what you got, and it's going to be 3 stars instead of 4 stars.
Right.
What about you, Niz?
But that's its own element.
Yeah, I never really thought about that. It never crossed my mind about, oh, this person would have done this better. That never crossed my mind. Not in the slightest, no.
I know in movies, people are really good at remembering actors and knowing like which big
Yeah.
actors are in movies. I don't think that's really kind of the culture around audiobooks yet.
Yeah, I feel like in
Yet.
movies and shows, we often compare different actors. Oh, this person would have played this part so much better. When it comes to audiobooks, I never think of that.
Before
I do appreciate the comparison of Prince Charming and Shrek, though, because at least it gives us the idea of like, oh gosh.
Yeah, that's a very distinctive voice. I think we all had it pop into our heads, and it was very clear.
Right. Thanks. Thanks for
Before
that.
I comment more on Jeffrey Rainey's answer, I want to read Paul Daniels' answer because it is kind of related.
Okay.
My biggest pet peeve with audiobooks, and I've heard this more than a few times, is when the voice doesn't match the book that I'm reading. It has nothing to do with the reader being a male or a female. It's the sound of the voice. If the narration matches the tone of the story, the audio experience is enhanced.
Yes,
The thing is,
I feel that.
how do you know that a voice matches the story? Like, what is it about the characteristics of a voice that match any particular story?
That's a fair question. I think we can break that down, actually. Logistically speaking, I think that voice can match a setting, right? Like you're talking dialects and accents and representation of a cultural community or something like that. I'm thinking like, remember we reviewed what was it called? Holmes?
Yeah, Holmes.
Yeah.
That was last
Yeah.
week.
Okay, exactly. I was like, wow, we're tipping all over the place, people. Yeah, so we all commented on the narrator not having proper understanding of pronunciations of names and just, cultural sensitivity and cultural representation really kind of fell through the cracks for that one. So I think that kind of thing can be mentioned. I don't know about tone of voice, though. But I do think that setting and character, that can be logistical representation.
I think when you compare tones to the story, it really does make a big difference. I think it's the maturity level of their tone. Do you get what I'm saying? Some people do have less, like, I don't want to say an immature voice, but it's they sound younger for the actual book, to be
Huh.
narrating the book. I feel like
Fair.
I did notice this for a few books where there's tone of voice just doesn't sound fitting to the actual story.
No, that's a good
Hmm.
point because
Yeah.
age is a characteristic we can really pick up in people's voices. And uh, it's kind of become an aesthetic of audiobooks that it always seems to
Hmm.
be older people reading these, especially back in the day. The only time you'll really see like younger sounding voices is in YA. And even at that, it's often older people reading it. I don't know why. I really don't know why.
Yeah, yeah.
But that is
When
a fair point,
you
though.
Mhm.
Yeah. When you brought up homes, that did bring up one of my pet peeves is when people don't know how to do their research and don't do their homework in searching up correct pronunciations, and it could be the simplest pronunciations, and then throughout the whole book you're just focused on their pronunciation and not the actual storyline.
Yeah, with Holmes, it wasn't just bad, it was egregious. And to be clear, this was the narrator on Sela, not the one if you were to buy the book on Audible, but like I'm not even 1% Arabic and I know that Alhamdulillah is not pronounced Alhamdulillah. Like it was extremely cringe.
Yeah.
And it's such a simple word, and I know to a lot of people like it may sound hard, but do your homework and you'll understand that it's a simple pronunciation, and it's your job, like
Yeah, exactly.
you have one job.
Yeah.
What are we paying you for?
I mean, and that's what we have, right? These conversations around disability, like all of these are nuances of the same kind of thing where we're just like, you could just do better by really accurately representing the content, the story, the characters, whatever it may be. It's not just audiobooks, it's everything. Sara Hillis is bringing a different pet peeve to the table. She says, one pet peeve I have, and it refers to classic books mostly, is when the word reader is changed to listener in the text. I mean, somehow it's all right if it's a modern book, but in something from Charles Dickens, for example, I still want to hear the word reader as when the author is addressing the person engaging with the book. I have not run into this again, but it would be a pet peeve. It's already a pet peeve for me when people insist that if you're talking about audiobooks, you can't be. Wait, am I on the opposite end of this? I don't mind if people say I'm reading a book, but they're talking about listening to an audiobook.
I have no issue with that. I think what
Yeah.
Sarah's talking about here is like specifically the wording
Changing the
in
text.
the story. You're changing the text. Yes.
Yeah, no
That
thanks.
said, Sarah, this is the pet peeve of all pet peeves. They're so nitpicky. Like, to what extent is this driving you crazy? Oh my God.
Yeah, I mean, she must have, even if it was just one book, though, if it was fully, like if it was thank you for listening, by oh my gosh, Julia Whalen.
Mhm.
And she had changed all the listenings to readings or vice versa. You know what I mean? Like for the audiobook version.
That would have been weird.
Yeah.
That would have
That's
been.
what it sounds like to me. It just sounds strange. Like, why would you go out of your way to do that? To change the text?
And people who listen to audiobooks know that this is a narrator reading a print book. Like,
Obviously.
we're not dumb,
It's not a brand new format or like a brand new version of the book. It's just the book being read aloud. So, yeah, I think that there's a depth to this pet peeve, Sarah. I'm on your side, Sarah.
This one is from Peter Tsitsinis. Audiobooks should be read without any accents of any kind. If I had my sight and was reading a book, would I read it with a mental accent? Why do companies not get this obvious fact? It's a rare occasion where accents are appropriate.
I disagree.
At all? Yeah.
I disagree.
Yeah, I disagree with
love
this too.
accents. I love when narrators do the accents. I think there's it really does sound like a story.
I think
But do you mentally, when you listen to when you read a book, do you mentally put an accent?
I know when I
No.
used to read print, no, it wasn't. No, but I don't think I do. But I don't know. I think we'd have to ask some sighted readers because that's a
I
really good
never
point.
did. When I used to like read books, I never did. I never thought of that. But when I listen to an audiobook, I like when an accent is put into it. I like the effort.
I do too. I think Peter's made himself pretty clear that it's like unequivocally no accents whatsoever. But one thing I've said on the show a bunch of times is you need to use subtlety if you're a narrator. And I think what can get annoying is like bad accents or overly thick
Bad accents,
accents,
yes.
right?
Yes.
Sometimes the accents can just be a bit extra where it sounds like the narrator is working a little too hard. Because like if you're listening to someone speak with an accent in real life, it's not an effort to do it like that. It should sound effortless. And if it sounds like it's hard, then it's going to be hard to listen to. To give you an example of like subtlety when it comes to accents, I read a book a while back called The Wandering Inn by Pirate Iba. It was a fantasy book where there were people who were like humanoid like lizards and humanoid like insects. And they have crazy voices you can imagine, right? So the narrator had a lot of options, but all she did was, I thought this was so clever. For the lizards, all she did was extend the S sounds just a little bit.
Yeah.
All she
Yeah.
did, right? And the beautiful thing is, if it was like a male or a female, she could still do that, but the only difference was that elongated S sound. And then for the insects, they would just have these especially loud fricatives and consonant sounds, like all these things, and just slightly
Mm,
exaggerated. That's
mm.
all it was, and that's all you needed to know that this was an insect person or a lizard person.
I guess to me, I enjoy all aspects. Like currently, I'm reading something that's very heavily, listening to an audiobook that's very heavily performed, but it works. Because I think that performance and accents kind of go in the same, well, not always, but most of the time go in the same realm for me. And if it's done well, very performative and theatrical, but still doesn't feel overly done. Right? The Alex Fishburne's narration of Malcolm X's autobiography is a great example of that. It was so theatrical, it was so performative, but the words on the page needed, I felt, that kind of performance to really leap out, to really sink in, or to, jab at you in certain places. And if somebody had just kind of cold read it, it wouldn't have been the same. Like if there was a subtle performer or narrator, I don't think it would have done that book justice. And so anyways, it's kind of a side note, but still, I think accents can fall into that as well. Like Jim Dale's rendition of the Harry Potter series, like he does so many accents, so many dialects as well, little bits and pieces of performer choices, like you said, right? Like different consonants being emphasized for the different characters, tones especially. But I thought all of it was done brilliantly because it's fantasy, number one, and there's so many different characters, and it's all very memorable.
And Jim Dale is like especially known for all those voices. I think that's someone who's an exceptional
good.
performer. Like I don't think you can
Yeah.
base the entire audiobook industry on an aberration like him. Like he's just unbelievable.
I know, but then when somebody says no accents, please, I'm thinking, what can be done so well?
Right. So Peter says no accents, but in a response, somebody mentioned, well, everybody has an accent. There's no such thing as no accents. And this was what he responded. I mean, for example, if a character in a book written in English is Tibetan, why give the narrator an accent that will lead us to think the character is Tibetan? If the character was talking to someone, they would be talking in Tibetan. Does the audiobook company think that we're that stupid that we would not know the difference? As if to say, like, we're given context clues that this character is Tibetan in his introduction. Is it really necessary to add the accent to constantly remind us that this character is Tibetan? I get that. That's actually super valid, Peter.
So we got another pet peeve from Jameel Vickers, and this one sounds like a real pet peeve as well. Not that any of them are not real pet peeves. Okay, Jameel says, when authors include cheap misdirections that lead to nothing.
Yes.
I know misdirection is meant to keep us keep a book unpredictable, but the thing is, people who read tons of books understand and recognize the typical storytelling structure. Eventually, misdirection just feels like fluff and a waste of time. There's a way to make a book unpredictable without making it cheap with misdirection.
Facts.
I would love to get Jamil on the show just to walk through this because it's so true. Now, are you thinking of particular genres here?
This is really big in mysteries, like murder
Yep.
mysteries and stuff like that. But a really good example of this is actually in a Stephen King book, Misery, where one of the characters attacks someone with a lawnmower and blood goes everywhere. And then that the person who did the attack cleans up everything, cleans up all the blood. But another character notices that they don't clean up underneath the lawnmower, so there'll still be blood everywhere. And they tell themselves, okay, so when the police come, I can tell them that there's blood underneath the lawnmower because the person neglected to clean that. Only thing is, that never comes up ever. Like, they mentioned the blood under the lawnmower like 3 times. It never comes up. What the hell, Stephen King? What's the point of that?
Oh, no. Stephen King as well? Stephen King's always got a reason.
He's not
He doesn't do
infallible.
this.
Just saying.
He's just the perfect author. No, okay, that is a really good example, though. And obviously, mystery is the perfect genre to, calculate and keep track of this particular pet peeve, right? Because you're always looking for something. Like every time a character is mentioned, a cliffhanger, some type of ellipses, you're thinking, ooh, there's a reason why. You're trying to investigate. So I think misdirection is very easy to kind of pick out and point out. But when I heard the word fluff in Jamil's response,
Ooh.
I'm also thinking of just romance and just crappy writing in general.
I mean, romance
honestly.
is like 80% fluff.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. We'll just leave that statement to stand on its own.
It's not her genre.
We already know that I could go on that thread. But anyway.
Yeah, moving on.
Yes, exactly.
We have one from Debbie Williams. When a book is not human narrated, the page numbers are counted. I don't ever read synthesized book for that reasons, even though synthesized voices are getting much better. Yo, I feel like that's a problem that's not going to be happening all that much anymore because AI is going to be doing that work, and you can very easily prompt it to just skip the page numbers. But how stupid is that they would use a synthesized voice and they would still read the page numbers? That's just infuriating.
I don't know. It's more like an ebook turned into an audiobook situation.
Oh, yeah.
Like where someone's just
fair.
not QCing things properly, or like I'm not pointing fingers. I'm just saying, right? Like these are, that's the problem with synth to begin with.
Here's one from my partner, Ari. I can't stand books that take forever to get started. Like you get 3 or 4 chapters in and there's 0 plot development.
Agreed.
There's a way to start a book where you introduce the themes, the characters, while also having plot. You don't need to put the plot on pause to introduce everyone. Good authors can do it all at the same time.
Personally, I think descriptions, too much description of setting, of this, of that, of scenario, of background, of character, insights, blah, blah, blah. I don't care. Just start in the middle of the story, please. Truly.
Oh, yeah. That's a really good way to start a book, actually, where it feels like there's already been so much story and just being dropped in.
Yeah. What's the one that Sara Hillis recommended? Beware the Woman.
Yeah.
Just the scene where it started. She's in a car, she's pregnant, she's sick and tired, and her husband's driving her crazy. That, start there. That was awesome. That was a great intro. Yes.
Yeah. No, honestly, it's true. I hate mundane things in books. I want something that's outside of the ordinary, but maybe that just has to do with my reading preferences.
I don't want to, in a small town. No. Caroline Bordeaux says, my pet peeve is when the speech is too slow. I start to tune out, necessitating the acceleration of the reading speed. Yeah, there are definitely times where I started at 1.0 speed because I tell you guys I'm going to get better at slowing down my books. And then by the end of the book, I'm at 1.5. Not just because of deadline purposes.
Producers will always make narrators read slower because probably a couple reasons. One, because they enunciate better. but two,
Hmm.
because they know that listeners will always speed up books. And if you're already speaking slowly and enunciating properly, then it's going to sound that much better when you speed it up. So it's just like a
Yep.
quality thing. Like honestly, I get it. But, like some narrators are just ridiculous, just like in slow mo.
Yeah. Yeah, I hate long pauses too. That's when I tend to tune out when
Yeah.
I hit long pauses.
You start
It
to think
drives
that
me
it was like a
crazy.
mistake.
Yeah, I'm like, is it done? Is the chapter over? Yeah.
Okay, we have one from Marcus Long. Hey Ramya, hey Jacob, love the show. It drives me crazy when authors give overly detailed descriptions of clothing. Don't get me wrong, I liked detailed descriptions of all sorts of things, but for some reason, authors go absolutely overboard with clothing. It's like these authors are secret fashionistas, and this is their way of putting it out there. Okay, I mean, you can describe all sorts of things, and I think this is kind of a noob author trap where the first thing they will put their hand to describing is clothing, because it's like the most immediate thing that you notice on people, sadly. But I honestly get it. I honestly get it. People just go too crazy, and it feels like they describe clothing for no good reason. Do you agree, Rams?
I I don't think so. At least it's not been enough of a problem for it to be a pet peeve. I do enjoy hearing people's fashion sense when it comes to characters because I think that it's supposed to play part of their personality. Now, obviously, if it's just a waste of words on a page, then there's probably more issue around that, right? Like, it's not just the fashion, it's probably a more writing situation. But nah, I like hearing what people are wearing. There's been a lot of books where women like in Addie LaRue, a lot of like scarf description, mug description, this and that, like things that I think just add to the quality of writing or getting to know a character on like a light level. Obviously not a deep level.
No, that's fair. That's fair. Rams, I know you have to get going. You're not going to be around for the second half, but after the break, we're going to be talking to Sara Hillis and Michael Fehr. Couples listen to movies all the time together. Why not listen to an audiobook together? This is not a segment where we're talking about how it could be cool. This is us pitching to you why it's awesome. That's going to be after the break, but Rams, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, stick with us after the break. We'll be right back. You're listening to AMI Audiobook Review. I'm Jacob Szymanski. Ramya Amuthan is gone, but she's not gone forever. And I made some cool new friends to replace her for the time being. Regular contributor Sara Hillis is with me, but a special bonus guest, her husband, Michael Fehr. Michael Fehr is here.
Fehr.
Yeah.
I'm doing my best, guys. I wanted to bring you two on because I've been doing something with my partner for a little while. We've been listening to audiobooks together, and couples watch movies together all the time. Why can't couples listen to audiobooks together? And this is not me wondering if this works or how this works. This is me actively promoting that more people should do it because it's awesome. Have you two listened to audiobooks together?
We have, yes. And we're listening to one together right now. Well, not right now, but at this juncture of time, we are listening to one together.
Stephen King's "You'd Like It Darker" is just came out very recently, and we started that. We listened to a few Stephen King books together. Actually, it seems to be a bit more of a likely thing. Our tastes kind of differ, and I think one of the reasons couples really struggle to make that time commitment, for audiobook listening together is when you both are doing separate things, like agreeing on a time when both of you are like, okay, let's drop whatever else we're doing and plow through more of an audiobook is kind of a bit of a juggling act at times.
And like as a couple, how do you decide what audiobook to listen together? It's already complicated enough to choose a TV show to watch together, but TV shows and movies have the added benefit of having trailers to entice you with. Audiobooks don't really have that. So how did you two land on listening to the Stephen King book?
Well, it's a new book, and we both like the short story / novella style of Stephen King. And we thought we'd just experience this one together. The last few collections that have come out, we've both listened to at different times. And we thought it's been too long, so we wanted to pick another Stephen King because we both like Stephen King's writing. And we just said, let's listen to it together, because also our anniversary is coming up soon, next Friday, the 7th of
Oh,
June,
cool.
depending on when this is coming out. I believe it's before that. And so just thought we'd do a little listening to prepare ourselves.
So,
Absolutely.
other than the Stephen King book, have you listened to audiobooks together in the past? Like, is this something you do regularly?
It wouldn't be regular for us, really, because both of us have kind of different, and we'll start books and we'll later think after we've started, oh, this might have been a good one for both of us to read, but I'm already like 4 hours into it, right? So
Mm.
it would require a bit more discipline than we've exercised to sort of start a book and then go, okay, before we dig too deep, we'll check with the other person, see if they want to read it. And I think that's happened a lot. Like, I've certainly recommended a lot of books to Sarah that she initially doesn't have any interest in, and then later on tries it out and goes, oh wow, this is awesome, right? So that does happen quite a bit.
Well, other than like listening to audiobooks together, another big aspect of like audiobooks within a relationship is just like discussing the books that you've read and sharing your thoughts on them, whether or not like both of you have read them. Do you have some insight on that?
Yeah, Michael is more of a sharer than me. And it's not his, like, it's lovely that he shares his thoughts on his books that he's reading. Sometimes he does it before I have my tea in the morning, and I'm like, okay, slow down. What book is this? What's the plot? We have a book. I just started reading it because I was reading other books at the time. He only recommended it to me, I think, 2 or 3 months ago. So this is actually a record.
Yes.
Called the Ghost Sequences. It's an Audie winner from this year. I think it won. And so I just started reading that book, and he was trying to tell me a plot one time, and I was like, wait, who did what now? Like, so that happens a lot.
Right. Is it because you jumped in like halfway through?
Well, it's both of us, in our daily lives, mostly are wearing headsets and listening to other stuff, right? So, by force of circumstance, we're interrupting what each other is doing at any particular time. And, sometimes that's fine if you're not so engaged in something, but other times it can really be, kind of a disruptive thing. So I probably chose a moment when she was more engaged than I presumed she was in whatever it was she was doing. And that is also part of, it can really give kind of a book a different impression if you're sort of brought out from what you're doing rather than having a discussion. We do have discussions just at odd, during dinners or other things, like when neither of us are doing anything, about books, and we'll comment on stuff. But like I do tend to, if I'm really enthusiastic in a book, I will just comment like, wow, that part was neat, as I'm hearing it, right? And she's probably doing something completely different at the time.
And she's like, are you done? I want to continue listening to my book.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
And that's what happens when you have two audiobook listeners in one household. You're always walking around with headphones, or you have two Bluetooth speakers going on at the same time in different rooms. What does it look like in your apartment?
And mostly it's headphones for us, but
headphones or earpods, and of course my hearing aids are usually in at the same time as my earpods, but sometimes they're not, and then I'm using my AirPods, and I either have them in transparency mode cranked up so I can hear what happens in the apartment, in which case I'll probably hear her say something, or if I haven't activated that mode, I'll miss it entirely. So there's there's things like that also complicate things even more than two fully hearing blind people. So you have all of those factors make for kind of disjointed conversations sometimes about a book that one of us is like really into and the other hasn't looked at yet. And plus you overhear parts, right? I mean, there are times when then I'll mention stuff about a book that that it doesn't look like she has any prospect of reading. And then later on, she'll decide to read it, and I'm like, "Oh wow, cool! Glad it didn't spoil everything," that kind of thing with my comments as I went through it myself.
Or one person walks into the other room and they overhear the audiobook, and it's a really weird scene, and you just go, "What the hell are you listening to?"
Yeah.
Exactly. Yep. That happens lots. Yeah.
And in relationships, it's so important to have good conversations, not necessarily like communicate about your relationship. I mean, obviously that's important, but also just having like day-to-day conversations about anything is important to maintain that relationship. And what audiobooks do, whether you're reading them together or not, is they can spark ideas. And even if you're not talking about the plot or the characters, like sometimes the setting can get you talking, sometimes just some bad writing can get you talking, or like even a book that you just really enjoy. I always love hearing about the books that my girlfriend is reading, because she always has a funny angle to it, to how she approaches them.
And sometimes it's even more like an idea in a book it'll be so interesting that one of us will start a conversation based on it, or just a bit of bad writing or some phrase that strikes us as just, what were they thinking? Or, oh, that was kind of neat. Like, it can go both ways, right? So it kind of springboards those kind of conversations as well.
I will say there are certain books that lend themselves better to listening together. And I'll propose that if anybody wants to try this, start with a book that's very plot driven and very like mystery oriented. So like a murder mystery or something like that. Because it's really engaging from the standpoint of like picking apart the clues, and you can work together. My girlfriend and I, we were long distance for a little while, and during that time what I was doing is I was streaming audiobooks on Discord together so we can listen together in real time. And I would just pause regularly and we would discuss like, oh, like who do you think did it? Like let's talk about motivations. Like, who's most likely to do that? We were listening to the trilogy, the Good Girl's Guide to Murder trilogy. Awesome series. I had so much fun. I look back on that time very fondly.
That's cool.
We actually started with Inspector McCleavey, the audio dramas from the BBC.
Oh, cool.
That was one of the very first things we listened together, actually, when first time she came over to visit. And so that's, I guess, for me, modern audio dramas are more what I think of as good for listening together than the books, just because you're sort of it pulls you both in. I find a bit more. With books, one of the things that I would steer people towards if they're just getting started doing this as a couple is maybe short stories or, essays, a book of shorter pieces, so that you have natural break points where you can stop, and either talk or just, one of you has other things to do, and you can just decide to stop there and wait for the next chunk of time, right, to come up that you want to continue reading.
Do you think it would be weird to listen to nonfiction or like a memoir together? Because when we watch movies together, like it's always, for the most part, it's always fiction, right? An action movie or comedy or something. Like, who gets together and watches documentaries?
Well, I mean, I listened to them all the time with my family growing up.
Really?
So for me, yeah, we would go to watch different shows or like documentary things on TV. And so for me, it would feel pretty natural. We certainly have listened to podcasts together, including news and different things like that. So yeah, it wouldn't be a big stretch for me to do a nonfiction thing.
And we did listen to one book that was nonfiction about Jack Barsky, the East German / Russian spy that he defected, and then he wrote about what he did when he was in the States. So we did, because I had watched The Americans and I really wanted to read the book, and Mike had the book, and I was like, okay, well, we'll just do it together. So we did listen to that one for sure.
Yeah, that was a pretty neat episode. It went right through from his very beginnings, trying to ensconce himself carefully into the society and get his papers, and because you have to do all that, right? When you to if you want to have a long-term stay and do some spying, you really need identification papers. So it was kind of interesting to hear, like, his whole journey right up until he defected at the end. It was a really neat book.
This is just an idea that's popped up in my head right now. When we're listening to audiobooks, is that really just a way to like kill time? Or like, is it time well spent? Like, because we're just like sitting there as couch potatoes, just listening, right? It's something we really do on our off times. Like, what do we look to get out of audiobooks, especially when we're listening together?
A common ground for thought and discussion, I think.
Yeah, well put.
Things just like TV, right? I mean, people can say the same thing about watching shows. Well, it's might be a bit of a hotter medium with the visuals, but you're still just sitting there, right? So is it powerless kind of waste of time, or is this thing changing lives and minds by changing how we think of things and what we might say to each other? So I would kind of put them on the same plane, in
Hmm.
terms of that.
I think what I'm trying to ask is, if it's not just shallow distraction to waste time, what is it? If it's more than that, what is it?
Yes, I think sometimes it becomes more than we think we want initially. Like I've
Right.
certainly found that some of the journeys, listening to some of the books have been journeys of thought that I think have changed both of our minds about things every once in a while. So that can happen. It can kind of sneak up on you, and then you're really engaged and really thinking about it, and it goes from perhaps idle passage of time together in a pleasant way to something more. I think that's a very possible thing depending on what kind of books you choose.
If you're listening together and one partner is really not liking it and the other one is loving it, what happens then? What do you do? Do you call a therapist? What do you do?
I think I think you just hopefully would be honest with each other and say, I'm not into this book. And then the other person would say, okay, well, I'll finish reading it then, or whatever. Like, I think that would be the simple way to do it. Just,
Yeah, like you don't have to force someone to finish a book they don't want to finish. I'd never want to do that. I would hope whatever book we start is given a good chance by both of us. But there are going to be occasions where you pick one that is really up one person's alley, hopefully not up either alley, and it's a total waste of money. I mean, that can happen too. Uh, right? You can be lured in by a premise that is poorly executed and or
Right.
not well narrated. It could there are a bunch of factors that could wreck an experience for both of us. But in my experience, that's been pretty rare. Most of the time, whether you finish a book or one of us will decide, yeah, I don't really need to listen to the rest of this, and then the other person just goes on and finishes the book.
It's also a little more easy to listen to a bad book if you're together and you're sort of sharing it with somebody else. It's like commiserating. You
yeah.
can kind of hate listen,
Yeah, you can laugh
Oh
at
yeah,
stuff, pick on things.
Yeah.
It's
yeah,
fun.
Bully the
lots of
author.
yeah, lots of scope for discussion of why a book is so bad, or just the poorly written sentences that just pull on an English major's sense of credibility at times, that kind of
Right,
thing.
yeah. Niz, I'm summoning you. Could you see yourself listening to an audiobook with your partner? I don't know if you've done this before actually.
I've never done that before, but I don't know. I feel like my husband is not the audiobook type. So to try to kind of sit him down, and I feel like we're so fidgety. So to not do anything and just sit down and listen to an audiobook together, I feel like it will take commitment.
Right. How are your
It
attention
will.
spans?
Like when I listen to an audiobook, I'm, putting makeup on, I'm doing my hair, I'm doing something, but I'm still listening to it. But to just sit down with my partner and to listen to an audiobook, I'm telling you, it's a commitment. It's something that I see that it would be challenging, especially for like a long period of time, 30 plus minutes. I don't know. I want to try it. I feel like I could convince him for
Oh,
sure.
One kind of factor that might come into play here a bit for Sarah and I is we're both of a generation that grew up doing one thing at a time. Like we grew up just listening to a story, and that was all we did. We'd hear stories, and we wouldn't be doing other things at the same time, because that was what we regarded ourselves as actively doing. We were reading, whereas now people can do other things while they read audiobooks. It's a natural kind of thing. And the other thing that's happened with the digital growing up digital as one book, Don Tapscott wrote that one. He's saying like it changed. Like now we're so used to multitasking that it feels almost unnatural
Yeah.
not to for the younger generation. Like it's a harder thing. I grew up paying attention to one thing at a time, one voice at a time, right? And if you're watching TV, that was what you were doing. You weren't, on your phone at the same time. You were just listening to the show, bad commercials and all. So,
That's the
yeah,
thing. Yeah, it's such a big difference. Like now when we watch TV, we're on our phones. We're even looking at TikTok videos while we're doing something else and the sh- and nowadays like the videos just keep getting shorter. Episodes keep getting shorter. We have shorter attention span. I just scroll through if I see something, if I watch something too long. Like that's just me. If I'm not doing anything at the same time, that's how I feel. So same thing with audiobooks. Like I need to be doing something, or else if I just sit there and listen to an audiobook, I'm not really paying attention.
Well, Niz,
I'm just kind of zoning out.
you bring up a really good point about like not being able to scroll on with audiobooks. Like it does feel like it's a very old school type of medium where you just sit
Yeah.
down and listen for however
But-
long you want, really, however long the book is.
But you can, and Michael does this. He
Yes.
has
What-
favorite scenes. He just wants to read the favorite scene. And so he finds the favorite scene, and I'm like, how could you not start at the beginning again?
yes, it bugs her to no end because there are times when I want to hear how a certain part of the story went again because I can't quite remember everything, or I just want to hear it again for just the sheer joy of it. And I will go to the middle of a book or somewhere, some chapter way into it, and she just does not do that. She asks if she wants to hear something again, she listens to the whole thing again, which to me is like, don't you remember most of it, right? Like I would just go to the parts that I want right then, because that's again, it harkens back to that's how I read. That was how I listened to books. When that was the only way of getting access to them.
Well, there's
So for me, it's more of akin to reading, and so I feel quite okay skipping around to different sections because that's what you do in a print book if you wanted to.
That's
Not
true.
everybody.
No, the sighties skim all the time, I'm telling you. But listen, there's always room for disagreements in relationships. Healthy
Yeah.
disagreements.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
I'll add one pro tip for any couple that's looking to try listening to audiobooks together. Make sure you have a way to quickly pause the book, whether you're listening on like a Bluetooth speaker. Like it's really nice if it has like a hard button you can really quickly go to, and if you can skip backwards quickly. Like you don't want to be getting up and pausing it, is all I'm saying. Because that's something I've learned the hard way.
Audible is really good about having those options where you skip back or forward by 15-second intervals and do things like that very easily. So that's added another really nice element, to especially longer books. If one of you's lost the thread or whatever, you can go back.
Yes.
And to where both of you were attentive and conscious of what was happening, and then start from there.
The more I listen to audiobooks, the more I realize that that's an essential feature of the player, is being able to quickly jump back, because we do lose attention once in a while. You need to be able to recognize when you didn't comprehend something and go back. Like that's how you become a better listener. But that's all the time we have. Sara Hillis, Michael Fehr, thank you so much for your time.
No problem.
Pleasure.
Tune in next week. Leave some feedback with us. You can call us toll free at 1-866-509-4545, or you can leave us an email at feedback@ami.ca. I'm Jacob Szymanski. Nusina Abdelmajid was our technical producer. Rami Amuthan was in the first half. Thanks for listening.